Boa tarde a todo mundo que está acompanhando mais um Esquenta COMPÓS. Meu nome é Rafael Groma, sou diretor científico da Associação Brasileira, da Associação Nacional dos Programas de Pós-Graduação, Programas de Pós-Graduação em Comunicação, a COMPÓS, e a gente já está fazendo este Esquenta, uma preparação para o evento de junho, logo mais, online, organizado pela UFMA Beatriz, com vários debates que você pode acompanhar aqui pelo YouTube. E hoje a gente tem um super debate sobre cultura de streaming com o professor David Arditi, da Universidade do Texas. E para apresentar o professor David Arditi, chamo a professora Beatriz Polivanov, professora do Programa de Pós-Graduação em Comunicação da Universidade Federal Fluminense e especialistíssima no assunto em cultura digital, estudo de música. É um prazer estar com você aqui, Bia.
Imagina, o prazer é meu, Rafael. Obrigada pelo convite, obrigada a você, obrigada a Compós. Acho que a gente vai ter uma tarde bem bacana de discussão aqui sobre cultura e streaming. Obrigadão.
Arrasem.
Vamos que vamos, então. Então, boa tarde a todas e todos e todas que estão nos acompanhando aqui hoje, agora nessa tarde. Reforço de novo meu agradecimento, os meus agradecimentos à Compós. E também reforço, né, já gostaria de deixar aqui, na verdade, meu agradecimento ao professor David, por estar conosco aqui hoje, né, vai falar sobre o seu livro, a gente já vai falar um pouquinho sobre isso. E agradecer ao público, né, quem está aí presente, quem ainda está chegando, a gente ainda está começando, podem ir chegando. A gente tem essa questão da língua, né, o debate vai ser, e a fala do professor David vão ser em inglês, mas a gente pode usar a tradução automática do YouTube para o português. Então, e também quem quiser fazer perguntas e comentários em português, fiquem à vontade, que a gente dá um jeito de traduzir na hora, a gente faz uma tradução simultânea para que todo mundo possa participar. Eu gostaria, então, de apresentar o professor, né, o professor David, então agora vou falar em inglês, né, depois eu volto para o português de novo para a gente explicar. Aliás, vou aproveitar e já vou explicar logo a dinâmica. A gente vai ter, o professor David vai ter cerca de 30 minutos, né, para apresentar as ideias principais do livro dele mais recente, que a gente já vai falar sobre ele. E depois a gente abre para o debate, né? Então a gente vai ter aí cerca de uns 30, 40 minutos, mais ou menos, para o debate. Então fiquem à vontade para ir anotando, né, possíveis comentários e questões que vão surgir, que vão emergir. Então, agora eu vou parar de falar em português e vou falar agora um pouquinho em inglês. So, thank you very much, David, for being here with us today. I'll try to introduce you. I don't know if I have all the correct information, but yes, I do. I hope I do. So, David Ardite is Associate Professor of Sociology at the University of Texas at Arlington, USA. And his most recent book is called Streaming Culture, Subscription Platforms and the Unending Consumption of Culture. And it was published last year, right? In April last year. It's been a year and a month, right? It's very fresh. It's a very recent publication. And he's also the author of Getting Signed, Record Contracts, Musicians, and Power in Society. And also, I Take Over, the Recording Industry in the Streaming era. And also, Criminalizing Independent Music, and also The Dialectic of Digital Culture, to name but a few of his productions, so his books. So we'll have about 30 minutes for your presentation, David. Of course, it's kind of more or less 30 minutes. Of course, feel free if you want to speak a little longer than that. And then we will open to discussion with the public, so with the audience. So we really do appreciate you being here with us. Feel free to use this time the best way you want to. So, of course, we want to listen about your book, but if you want to add something else, that's okay too, of course. So thank you very much once again, and I guess that's it. Now the floor is with you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Beatriz, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you, Raphael, for inviting me. At one point during the introduction, I didn't have any audio, so I hope that's not on my end, and I hope everything goes smoothly. But so thanks again for having me. On March 29th, 2022, the 24-hour cable news network CNN launched a streaming service called CNN Plus. CNN spent $300 million to develop the service. They hired top talent and started programming for the service. But a month later, on April 30th, the service closed. The desire for CNN to launch a streaming service was as predictable to me as its ultimate demise. The desire by most companies, they're trying to figure out a way to profit from the subscription fees associated with streaming services. The conventional wisdom is that viewers are willing to pay for content. However, I think it is equally sensible for consumers not to subscribe to additional services. In the United States, we have a long list of services, usually with a plus in their titles, to garner subscriptions. Through the pandemic, media companies accelerated streaming service development as people rarely left their homes to consume entertainment. This is a part of the process I call unending consumption, which I will describe today. The idea for the book came to me from my research on the music industry. In the United States, the average consumer spent about $45 per year on recorded music going back decades. But a big change happened with the launch of Spotify, Beats Music, Tidal, and Apple Music. These streaming services provide seemingly infinite music for the price of about $10 per month. Record companies viewed this as a 300% increase in music revenue. And I think it's important to think here that $120 per year doesn't encompass all music consumption and definitely not all recorded music consumption. So while people are subscribed for $120 per year to one service, they might still listen and watch videos on YouTube where there's ad revenue that goes into that, or there's a new resurgence in vinyl records. So I have a picture here of Record Store Day, right? People line up to buy vinyl albums. So we have all of this additional revenue that's going on. Additionally, when labels report revenue, they do not include all this revenue the way they did with CDs. So when they say, the global record industry is worth $20 billion or something, they don't calculate it the same way. So with a CD, they include, right, distribution, all the costs that go into producing that CD gets recorded. But when they report revenue now, they don't say, well, Spotify has this much revenue, so that all is part of recorded music revenue. The whole thing is calculated differently. So when they say the amount, they're just not being honest. And this is something I talk about a lot in my work before streaming culture, especially in iTakeover. So I guess before I get there, today's talk, I'm going to give kind of an overview of the book. Then I'm going to dial in to define unending consumption. And I'm going to spend quite a bit of time reading from chapter 2, which is entitled Digital Consumption, Disruption, Distribution, and Disintermediation. So here's the table of contents for the book. In the introduction, I define streaming, I define culture, and I define unending consumption. In chapter 2, which I won't say much about here because I'll be talking about it later. Then the next 3 chapters deal with different, or the next 4 chapters rather, deal with different types of media. So chapter 3, streaming music, unending consumption begins. I argue that music is really kind of the original space where we start thinking about streaming, partly because streaming music takes less bandwidth. And when the internet wasn't as fast, you could still stream music. Chapter 4 gets into streaming film and the different services that we do that on in the way, especially with Amazon. We end up thinking that we can stream anything, but in the end, we still have to rent. So we spend more than subscribed fees. We also pay these rent fees. Streaming TV, a lot of people call in the United States this the golden age of television, because television programming has gotten so good. Some people wonder if we've gotten past peak TV. I still think it's pretty great. It's kind of become long movies. Chapter 6, I get into streaming video games. So increasingly, instead of going and buying a video game at the store, whether it's for a PlayStation or an Xbox or Nintendo, now we stream them online. Even I have a Nintendo Switch, and on the Nintendo Switch, you could subscribe to a monthly Nintendo service and receive free access to kind of classic Nintendo games. Chapter 7, I look at using Raymond Williams' typology of the dominant, residual, and emergent. I look at these kind of different cultural forms that are coming out, things like Twitch, and how they connect to both the new and the old and the resistant. And then in the chapter, I conclude by talking about my assumptions on the way things are going. Unending consumption. Corporate quest for profits drives streaming culture, especially the subscription variety. Whereas culture stood apart from business interests before the 20th century, a remarkable shift took place that emphasizes the commodity logic of culture. The more we stream content, the more the culture industry increases profit. Culture industry is a term developed by Max Horkheimer and Theodore Adorno to differentiate cultural consumption from quote-unquote mass culture. When people began referring to mass culture in the early 20th century, Horkheimer and Adorno thought that this sounded too much like culture that emerged from the masses. The quintessential example is broadcast radio, which sends a signal out to a largely passive audience. Horkheimer and Adorno reviewed mass culture as culture produced from above and forced upon the masses. To distinguish the top-down approach of commodified culture, they called it the culture industry. By emphasizing the industrial nature of production, they placed its goods alongside other commodities from shoes to cars. In the culture industry, we can see the Fordist logic of production at work. Under Fordism, mass production worked by individuating tasks. Each worker had one job, and the commodity moved along a conveyor belt on its way to production. Horkheimer and Adorno argued cultural commodities followed the same logic. From Tin Pan Alley in New York City, where the modern songwriting system developed, to Hollywood and the mass production of film, to Motown Records in Detroit, Michigan, which used assembly line production to make music. These sites of mass cultural production resemble the Fordist logics at work in the 20th century production of music and culture. However, we go through distinct phases of capitalism, and streaming cultural commodities marks a new phase. In 2021, it is clear that we've entered a new phase of capitalism, one I call unending consumption. As capitalism has developed, there have been clear moments of transition from one mode of capitalist organization to another. For instance, industrial capitalism required the mass production of similar goods. Capitalism in general is the endless accumulation of capital using wage labor to produce commodities for capitalists to profit from. The industrial phase focused on producing more goods. The system hinged on planned obsolescence. Industry made sure that their goods had a shelf life, and periodically consumers would have to buy newer versions of commodities. However, business owners and corporations recognize that they can only sell so many cars or record players. Take the record player, for instance. People only needed one record player in their home. Record player manufacturers recognized that they could increase sales and profits by selling music to play on record players. Each home may have one record player, but they can own dozens of records. This process of providing more consumer goods is known as the expansion of the means of consumption. Basically, capitalists provide more consumer goods for people with expendable income to consume. The expansion of the means of consumption developed as a way to reduce overproduction while growing capital. These consumer goods are primarily in the form of cultural commodities. The system worked well to stabilize the global economy, but it requires continual acceleration. Streaming culture accelerates the expansion of the means of consumption. Think about all the things we consume today that we didn't consume 30 years ago. Cell phones, internet service, subscriptions to music and video providers, expensive coffee drinks, accelerated fashion seasons, surveillance devices, TVs in every room, computers, tablets, etc. But as many people buy more cultural goods, they spend less time with each artifact. I call the current stage unending consumption. And I'm actually playing with the idea of unending consumption in my next project to argue that unending consumption is just one part of a new phase of capitalism that I call digital feudalism. And I'm happy to talk more about that during the question and answers. But for now, I'm calling it unending consumption. When we subscribe to music, video software, or news services, we provide companies with constant and consistent consumption. It is unending because once we subscribe, there is no out. If you want to continue to listen to music, you have to keep subscribing. Or you may subscribe to a digital newspaper and forget that you have a subscription. In both cases, companies count on the constant return of revenue, whether or not you actually consume anything. Furthermore, we're experiencing the proliferation of subscription services. Now, content owners can choose one platform to stream their content, and consumers must subscribe to multiple platforms if they want to consume this content. The on-demand economy made us think about the cost and value of every transaction. We ask, do I really want to pay $1 for a song on iTunes or download it for free from the Pirate Bay? When given the opportunity to subscribe, however, this calculation changes to whether I'd like to receive infinite songs for $10 per month or, one song for $1. Streaming technology ensures either easy access to consumers through legal means, and by subscribing to these services, we don't think of the cost in the raw way that on-demand services require. Streaming culture puts the world of cultural content at our fingertips. All right. So now I'm getting into digital retail disruption, distribution, and disintermediation. Streaming technology changes the way we consume culture, but is it disruptive? In the television world, producers and streaming platforms receive real-time data about consumption on everything from the content of the shows to the demographics of the viewers. This changes what television is produced. In music, labels recognize that a viral TikTok star has the power to drive consumption in the moment, even if no one remembers that particular TikTok star in a year. They sign these acts knowing they can generate a hefty profit. In film, producers can experiment with low-budget films made for streaming because it allows studios to see what content is trending. Part of the enthusiasm for digital retail distribution stems from cutting out the intermediary, also known as disintermediation. By dealing directly with consumers, retailers argue, on the one hand, this disrupts traditional networks. But on the other hand, they celebrate this as a massive change that brings freedom. But what we are likely looking at is what I would call re-intermediation, and many have written about that concept. Changes in the retail system trend toward greater efficiency. While internet celebrants declare these changes amount to disruption, here I demonstrate, contrary to theories of disruption, new technologies provide the oil to the machine that is capitalism. Disruption. As early as 1995, internet prognosticators predicted that the internet would disrupt the world as we know it. Disruption is a dominant theme in internet discourse. In 1999, the music industry claimed disruption caused by Napster would kill recorded music. In the early 2000s, the dot-com bubble promised to replace old business with new. Internet utopians believed the internet would bring democracy to everyone around the world in the 1990s, and social media utopians believe the same thing in 2011. How has the internet disrupted society? The answer is the dominant change the internet fosters is a change to business models while we still long for democratic change. And I know elections in the United States and Brazil show how social media and the internet have given us kind of the reverse of democracy. So let's look at Amazon. In 1994, Jeff Bezos founded Amazon as a means to sell books online. This was a watershed moment in the history of retail, unbeknownst to anyone at the time. But we also see a cascading effect that repeats itself throughout the retail industry, regardless of product. In the 1990s, big corporate book chains put small independent bookstores out of business. The big corporate bookstores of Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and Borders here in the United States provided large retail outlets for books, calendars, and stationery with an emphasis on a very specific market: best-selling books. They placed the bestsellers in the center aisles, and the other rows of books are known in the industry as quote-unquote wallpaper because they create an ambiance, not sales. And here I have a picture of what that looks like, right? You have all these rows of tables with the bestsellers, and you have on the side what they call wallpaper, which as you dig in deeper, you know, they're more and more obscure titles that they may or may not ever sell. Independent bookstores. The result was lower priced books with less diversity. Independent bookstores always provided a variety of books and still sold bestsellers to stay open. The big corporate bookstores put most small shops out of business. Then Amazon put many big corporate bookstores out of business themselves. Amazon offered an essentially unlimited catalog of books available at the click of a button and delivered to your front door. Eventually, Amazon launched the Kindle and Barnes & Noble launched the Nook. These electronic devices eliminated the need for physical copies of books. At the same time, Amazon enabled the phenomenon of self-publishing books at a very low cost. Small mom-and-pop bookstores offered space to local authors to sell books on their shelves, but corporate bookstores more or less put an end to this practice. So in a strange turn, Amazon recreates the capacity for authors to self-publish. Amazon has gone on to, quote-unquote, disrupt numerous industries, especially of the cultural variety. But Amazon has created more problems for retail than anything else. Big box retailers from Best Buy to Walmart have the most to lose from Amazon's economic takeover. The book-selling giant turned ubiquitous retail deliverer upended the economy of scale of other predatory retailers. In this sense, disruption deals with changes to business practices, not changes to fundamental aspects of society. This disruption represents a shift towards more monopolization than a shift away from it. To disrupt is to interrupt in a way that alters or destroys a process or activity. Disruption in a factory happens when workers go on strike. Disruption to an election occurs when people don't go vote or can't go vote. A hurricane can disrupt education if schools have to close for a period of time due to the storm or its effects. Earthquakes can disrupt roads by cracking them and making them impassable. Pandemics, as we've learned, can disrupt everything. For me, disruption can be revolutionary when it overthrows the status quo. When internet prognosticators predicted the internet would bring democracy, they predicted disruption. This again happened when social media utopians believed that Twitter and Facebook gave us the Arab Spring and Occupy Wall Street. However, neither the internet nor social media disrupted the dominant order. People showing up to protest changed the status quo. In hindsight, we see in 2020 that we still do not have democracy, and digital networks provide hackers the capacity to disrupt digital voting machines. Additionally, following the 2016 American elections, Brexit referendum, and other elections, it is clear social media provide platforms for undemocratic disruption as they allow foreign powers to tamper with elections. In any case, the status quo of capitalism and non-democracy continue unabated. The internet did not disrupt anything, but rather it changed the way businesses function so they can make higher profits. So next I turn to distribution and disintermediation. Sorry, I skipped the slide ahead a little early. When we think about how streaming platforms change our cultural landscape, it is important to consider how power plays a role in these transformations. For instance, if we think about YouTube created disruption for the culture industry. At the same time, it gave corporations more power in the media system. Users create videos and share them with others, but YouTube uses data about users to better market to them, thereby increasing Google's profits. Google doesn't care what types of videos you share because as long as users comply with the law, they will distribute any video from ones that criticize Google's work environment to ones that promote other streaming platforms. Digital technology changed the way we receive cultural content. The same processes whereby one technology or business model replaces an old technology or business model takes shape on the internet by eliminating layers of intermediaries accustomed to exploiting new technologies for profit. In 2021 and in 2022 now, digital media provide a means to distribute content for profit. Internet utopians of the 1990s imagined the internet as a platform on which information wants to be free. However, the influx of venture capital at the turn of the century, which resulted in the dot-com bubble, demonstrated information is profitable. Specifically, information is profitable because it eliminates layers of distribution. Take the newspaper industry, for example. In order to deliver papers, newspapers require printing presses and warehouses with staffs. Then the papers need to go out to readers through a network of deliverers who need to traverse every street in a given geographic area every morning. With a newspaper subscription, each newspaper is relatively cheap for readers as it is subsidized by advertisements. Yet paywalls prevent us from reading the news. And don't get me started on what this has done to disinformation. If we look further into the cultural realm at something like film or music, the distribution costs increase. While new costs exist in terms of data storage and digital workers, the internet has allowed the cost of media distribution to go down and profits to go up. The driving force behind the profitability of information on the internet is the process of disintermediation, a big word for a small concept. Disintermediation means to eliminate things that come between. This all derives from the use of the word media. A medium is something that comes between two things. To intermediate means to come between those two things. When we discuss media, we're really discussing communication technology that comes between. Disintermediation specifically means the elimination of intermediaries in the media distribution chain. Intermediaries are colloquially called middlemen, despite the patriarchal connotation of the word. When Apple opened iTunes, it eliminated the need for factories that produce compact discs, trucks to distribute the product, warehouses to store CDs, and physical retailers. This is disintermediation at work. But to think of iTunes as disintermediation misses the point that the online music store continues to intermediate music and consumers. So it is better to think of it as re-intermediation. What cannot be lost in the process of disintermediation is the decreasing costs to culture industry producers as a result of the elimination of intermediaries. If we just think about the cost of a CD, the CD must be manufactured and printed. The packaging must be created. CDs must be stored before sale. At each stage, the various parts must be shipped from various warehouses to other warehouses. CDs are distributed to retailers, and retailers mark up the price approximately $6 on their end. All of these costs are more or less eliminated when internet distribution disintermediates music. While the transition from CD or DVD to download transformed the cultural commodity through disintermediation, the form remained resolutely in the same realm of commodity. Instead of buying CDs, disintermediation allowed music listeners to buy computer files. These computer files allowed content producers to wire shut the uses of the files by only permitting certain uses. But the cultural consumption still emphasized buying and collecting. The shift from downloading to streaming further solidified a transition from owning to renting, hence the need to think in terms of unending consumption. Streaming not only disintermediates, it de-acquisitions because we no longer own, but rather perpetually subscribe. The goal of producers shifts from producing new cultural content for people to purchase to providing access to new and old content. The new content sweetens the pot to entice subscribers to stay subscribed, but the economics of cultural consumption shift. People subscribe for immediate access to get their fix of cultural content, but it ensures that few cultural artifacts stay popular for long. Unending consumption happens at a time when cultural producers create large quantities of cultural content, but in the content's ubiquity, few people listen to, read, watch, play, or use the bulk of this content. The logic of subscription services is not to have people listen to, read, watch, play, or use any specific content closely, but rather to entice them to subscribe. Since subscribers can never consume all of the content, they stay subscribed to try to reach the end. In 2002, following an early meme, DirecTV DSL created a commercial where a guy reaches the quote-unquote end of the internet. He's just kind of sitting there going, "Honey, I hit the end of the internet." With Spotify, Netflix, Amazon, and YouTube, it is impossible to reach the end of their libraries, so subscribers remain on the hook. As political theorist Jody Dean describes commutative capitalism, the turbulence of networks creates, quote, the rapidity of innovation, adaptation, and obsolescence, unquote. Subscriptions intervene in this process by allowing subscribers to ignore the obsolescence of cultural content and perpetually access the new when it is old. Distribution ceases to limit access, But the question becomes access to what? The disintermediation of the cultural distribution system does not create disruption, it drives profit. Thinking about streaming platforms as digital distributors helps to reevaluate how streaming culture interfaces with the economy. Disintermediation does not end distribution, it just makes it more profitable for large corporations. I conclude the book with the following paragraph. Regardless of what comes after unending consumption, the logic of unending consumption will create its own undoing. People will hit a point where they don't want to subscribe to more services. Since culture is ever changing, we can't expect streaming culture to remain a dominant form. Music, movies, television, and video games will continue to blur, but will mainly remain in their discrete spheres. While streaming culture transforms the way we consume culture and the fundamental structure of capitalism, the moving nature of both streaming and culture points to an imminent shift in the structure of society. And as I started the book talk, I think this explains CNN Plus. People only want to subscribe to so much. They also want physical goods, which is evidenced by the increase of vinyl sales along other physical music goods. I look forward to discussing this more with you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. I don't know if Rafael wants to say something, or can I go? Can I? Okay, I guess I can. Okay. Thank you so much, David, for your presentation. I have lots of questions actually, but okay, let's try to organize things, and then we can open to the public, but to the audience. But I would like to make the questions myself first, if I can, and then it's time for people to warm up. I think it's a good way to start. And just going back to your presentation and to your book itself, I think you have very powerful arguments, and I think it's, for me, one of the most important ones is related to this idea of reintermediation. So it's all connected to capitalism and Marx's idea itself of not seeing who is intermediating our consumption practices, right? So I think it's a very compelling argument, and I couldn't agree more. And just one thing that I think it's also important, because the way you write the book, it's so approachable. I think it's so understandable, and I think it's important when we're talking about popular culture that people understand what we are writing. We should not be talking only to people who read, those very hard, complex academic books. We get the examples, and they have kind of a universal approach. I'm from Brazil, but I couldn't understand all the examples you give during the book. From the beginning with Game of Thrones until the very end, I could relate to that, because it's a kind of a global economy, so we're kind of part of the same thing, right? So I think it's a very for me, it's very important to I like when I read things that I can understand, and I can see that people can relate to that. And then one thing that I was thinking about when you were presenting, and when I was reading your book also, is that for me, there's of course we have a lot of contents that are at our disposition in some way, but at the same time I feel that we have less and less time to consume them, or if not less and less, we do not have so much time, of course, to consume everything we want to, and we also have this FOMO, this feeling of missing out. So I think it's also part of this, the way contemporary capitalism works is giving the impression that you were always missing something. You can never ever complete the catalog that any streaming platform has. That's the basic point of that, right? And then I would like to listen to you, if you could talk a little bit more of this never-ending consumption attached to this idea that we do have a feeling of anxiety. If we're not part of that, we're out, we're missing something. So I think there's a lot of things that are connected not only to the platforms themselves, and not only to the contents, but also to the feeling of not being part of something. So could you comment on that a little bit, please?
Absolutely. And well, thank you for the kind words to say that it was accessible. That was the kind of goal, and you never know how well that's kind of being articulated. As far as the kind of anxiety inducing fear of missing out aspect, I think we're absolutely caught into those kind of cycles. But I also feel like the kind of important aspect of that is how we are getting into tighter and tighter circles. So popular culture has always offered this kind of water cooler talk, as we say in the United States. You get to work and you're like, "Oh, did you see such and such show last night?" And because people are they want to have those kind of conversations, they then end up watching the same kind of shows to have a kind of a cultural relationship with the people around them. What I've noticed increasingly with this type of streaming culture is we're getting into tighter and tighter circles. So in the United States, for the longest time, we had three dominant networks: ABC, NBC, and CBS. So on a given night, primetime television, you only had one of three shows you could pretend, or one of three networks at any given time that you could be watching. Cable increased that, and so in the book, I talk about the way kind of streaming culture and unending consumption are products of streaming, or products of cable. But with the kind of proliferation of all these different opportunities to watch different television shows or movies, we have to really tighten in onto our networks. And one weird phenomenon with this that I've seen with my own colleagues is not having the opportunity during the pandemic to actually, be hanging out in the in our department kitchen, getting food, getting coffee. I don't have interaction like that with my colleagues anymore, and so we've begun to diverge and not watch all the same things because I don't get to hear like somebody's into a particular show. But then at the same time, I think that we do watch a lot more types of television shows. I mean, number one, seasons have gotten way shorter. Instead of having 28 episode seasons, we're down to like 8 to 10 episode seasons. So then what do? You binge watch, and people watch entire seasons over a weekend so that when they show up on Monday at work, they can also talk to their colleagues about the show, or else risk hearing spoilers, right? So I think that really talks to that fear of missing out that you're talking about, because we have that risk of spoilers, and social media helps to feed that. I remember when Avengers Endgame came out, and I don't talk enough in the book about social media in this way, but when Endgame came out, I had my brother-in-law and his family were coming to visit us, and I hadn't seen very many of the Marvel movies, but he's a huge fan, so he said, we're going to watch it first thing in the morning. We didn't watch the midnight showing, but we went to go watch it at 10 a.m. because he said, I can't go on to social media until we've seen the thing, or else I'm going to see spoilers and it's going to ruin it for me. So, we got there at 10 a.m. because he had that kind of fear of missing out. So I don't know if that answered your question, Beatriz, but that really got me thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just the start of a conversation. I mean, we can go someplace else too. So this is something that I was thinking about, because we do have this feeling that if we are not part of that, then you're out. But then at the same time, you cannot go online. That's it, because you get the spoilers. So then you're out again for the second time, kind of a second layer of being out in a way. But at the same time, I feel that there is this creation of anxiety. Really, there's a lot of content, and I feel young people have this they have this feeling that they are kind of compelled to watch or read or see so many things, and sometimes it's tiresome. It's like I don't have time for all that. And another thing that we don't think about too much, I think, is that not everybody can do that. Who can binge watch like everything they want? So many people that I know, they cannot. They are working constantly so that they can pay their bills. So there's also a matter of social class, I guess, too. So I think it's a matter of who can do that too. And
before you get into the next question, you also got me thinking about how different, and this gets to that different circles. Not having taught, I teach a large introduction to popular culture class every spring. So it had been 2 years since I taught it face to face, and which made me also age really quickly. I'm used to talking to freshmen and sophomores each year and learning about like what's going on, but to have that gap. And then when I came in, I was referencing really great shows that I watch, and all semester they kind of would look at me blankly. And these are like active shows that are going on right now, and they're not watching them. And quite frankly, they didn't care about my recommendation. They're like, old guy, we don't really care. So it's also, these are interesting turns that are happening, and it's all happening so fast. It's hard to keep up with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. For us, it's the same thing. We've been like 2 years away from the classroom, so it's hard to go back now, and we see the differences that it made. I mean, there's so many things to talk about in relation to that. But then I would go to another point. I believe people have questions already, but I would like to address one more thing. That of course your perspective is from the USA. That's where you come from, of course. But me coming from Brazil, I could not stop thinking about piracy. In Brazil, it's a very common practice for us not to subscribe to things because we download things for free. It may be like books or movies or songs. We do that to lots of contents, to be honest, cultural contents. And it's part of our culture in a way. Then I was thinking from this global South perspective, if we could address it like that, would it be kind of a way of resisting capitalism in a way? Because then you're not paying for the services, you're not subscribing. Here in Brazil, we do so many things to share our subscriptions so that not many people have to pay for it, right? We do that. We do that a lot. And then would it be a way of resisting this system and not subscribing to all these platforms? But at the same time, it would affect somehow in the very end point of this chain, it would affect the artists in a way. And I know that they do not profit a lot from these platforms. We know that, but somehow it would take their money. So could you comment on that, on how pirates could be seen from a very common practice here in the global South as a way of resisting, or at the same time putting one more complex layer to this discussion about the unending capitalism?
Right. So, I mean, where I started in my research was all about the idea of piracy, and developed a concept that I call the piracy panic narrative. So, I think sharing content is great, and I think that should be the way that we do it. Personally, I mean, I'm a really old school soul, and I still go to the local record store and buy my music and rip it onto my computer. And my car still has a CD player in it, so I drive around and listen to CDs after I buy them. And so I'm definitely there. But where my research came from, when I was working on my master's degree, I went to Nashville, Tennessee, which is kind of the country music hub in the United States. And so I was playing in a band with a guy, and he was friends with this bass player named Victor Wooten. Victor Wooten is like this phenomenal electric bass player. He was famous. He got famous by playing in a band called Bela Fleck and the Flecktones. They called it Newgrass instead of Bluegrass. But anyway, we show up there and he's playing it. We go to his rehearsal and he's rehearsing for the Victor Wooten band. And him and all his brothers are musicians. His brother, I'm talking to his older brother, Reggie. He's kind of an out there guy, and we're talking about time travel. And I mean, it's weird conversations going on. And I hear their other brother, Joe Wooten, who played, and he still might be in the Steve Miller Band, which is a big band from the 1970s, rock band. And I hear Joe Wooten going, and this is probably 2005, so it's after Napster's shut down, but he's like, I don't give a fuck about Napster. I want people to download my music so that they come to my shows because I only make 10 cents off the sale of a CD. So I'm not paying my bills from this. I only pay my bills from people going to see shows. And he saw music as an advertisement mechanism for getting people to go to shows. So I took that to heart, ended up writing my master's thesis about it, ended up writing my dissertation about it. I've been writing about that kind of thing. I'm all about piracy. In the United States, subscriptions, I feel like they've kind of killed piracy. So I'm happy to hear that in Brazil, there's still a strong pirate culture. Because, it's really just the dominant global media conglomerates that benefit from the sale of copyrighted material. It's not the artists, right? So in my book, Getting Signed, I trace how musicians get paid, or much better to say how they don't get paid. And so what we're really dealing with is the exploitation of labor, and the workers themselves don't have a means to even organize because they don't see themselves as workers. They don't get paid anything. So I mean, I think it's great to, steal, quote unquote, steal the content. But, even me personally, I don't have a subscription to Spotify, and more recently, because of some political things, I stopped using Spotify, period. But I always just used it with free advertising, right? So if you can just get on your computer and listen to YouTube, which is what a lot of people do, then like, why even go out of the way to use a pirate website when you can just get it for free through YouTube? So I think it's an interesting process. And I think on a global level, one of the biggest ironies of the United States being such a imperialistic push of copyright is that in the 19th century, we didn't have very good copyright laws in the United States, and they had a hard time producing domestic books in the United States that were English language American books, because what they would do is they'd print British novels in the United States and for cheaper, because they were quote unquote pirated, and it wasn't illegal. So domestic English language American novels had a hard time. American novelists had a hard time getting their stuff out there. So they had to create, instead of these kind of typical genre, recognized across the world for writing books, they had to create American novels that really featured American themes to get people to buy them. But then as soon as, I forget the name of the law that was initially passed, as soon as they passed it, they started making American novels like every other novel. So that whole genre itself went out the window, so to speak.
That was an interesting fact. I didn't know that. I think I do have a couple of more questions, but I think we can go to the audience questions. Let me see. Hi. Oh, yeah, there's the first one, Bernardo Fontaniello. Hello, I would like to know David's thoughts about the data analysis in the streaming platforms and its application in the media industry. Thank you, Bernardo.
Thanks, Bernardo. Yeah, I mean, one thing that we are reckoning with is the fact that so much data about demographics, who's consuming, what they're consuming, is all available in real time. So in a way, where media industries have always argued, I think falsely, just like their arguments about piracy, I think they've always argued we're high risk. We don't know what's going to sell. But now with the kind of immediate data that they get, they know they can just produce, say, a television show of a few episodes, put it out there, and they can see if people are watching it, where they're watching it, how drawn in are they, right? Do they binge it, or do they watch it slowly and forget about it? They can get down to this kind of individualized data and figure out what they should produce more of, so they don't put as much money into something ahead of time. And I think that this really comes out of music. The biggest selling single ever in the United States came a couple years ago by Lil Nas X. Lil Nas X had never performed live. It was the first song he ever recorded. He was not a musician. He was someone who, and I don't know how familiar you are in Brazil with Lil Nas X, but he was fantastic at using social media and creating memes. So when he put the song out, it was originally it was cultural content of memes, right? So people are clicking on it, they think it's hilarious, and then it got so huge that he signed a record deal, and they knew that it was only going to get bigger and that they were already going to make back what they were putting out because of the data that they knew. And they know how these things, the arc of a new release happens. So if they can see it and they see the rate at which something's rising, they can extrapolate that out and know where it's going to go. And it's all based on this kind of data analysis. So I don't know if that answered all of your question, Bernardo. I can go on about data analysis all day.
I think maybe we can jump to another one, and then if we have time, we can go back to this one. Now we have Tiago Trindade. My question is about the impact of the capitalism and the new business models that impair in platform. My question is about the impact of capitalism and new business models that impair in platforms, as streaming platforms. Our lives are crossed by screens and platforms, and we are every time more attached to this digital environment of content that never ends, whether to consume, socialize, or even listen to music. Do you think that this model of society, even more in touch with screens and platforms, results in even more tired users who wants to take a break with their mobile phones and desktops? Last part, or even go back to consume music and disco stores, like back to the golden times of music stores, cinemas, or video game stores. Sorry for no, do not apologize, Thiago. Yeah, I think, is that okay, David? Do you get the question? I think it's
yes, exactly, and this is the main thesis of the book, right? That the more we try to subscribe to platforms, we kind of get tired of it. And the one thing I don't talk about in the book is the fact that people do often have moments where they want to turn off their phones and get rid of their phones, that they want to go on retreats. I know Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, he was infamous for, like, at a week at a time, he would go on these like Buddhist meditation retreats where he would just completely unplug for everything because he felt like his body needed it. So I think there's this increasing need as we stream and stream more that we do need to unplug and just go away. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, right, there was a period of time where there was no unplugging. And not only was there any unplugging, I don't know about in Brazil, there was nowhere to go. And even, I live in Texas, and parks, which used to just be slow, if you went to a park on a weekend, and this was back in the early days of, do we wear a mask outside in a park? Like these kind of questions were going on. I'd go places and kind of be grossed out, even though I was outside, because there were so many people. You'd have to get an appointment for a particular time to go to a park, and then you'd still go to the park and it would be packed. So it made me very much a homebody. I'm sitting in my home office right now. So it becomes even more difficult to unplug, I feel. And we're getting more and more kind of wrapped around always being on.
Just one thing that I would like to add is that I think at the same time it's hard to go back to what we had. I don't think we're going to see this movement of going back to music stores or video game stores. I don't know, but I don't believe that these places are going to be the places where we're going to be off. I think we're going to have different relations with that, but it's another point.
I think it reminded me about that part of the question. We are having a pretty big resurgence of vinyl records, and now there's even some feeling that there's now a resurgence of CDs going on. And one of the things that I do is I send my students for extra credit to go to record stores and my introduction to popular culture, and they just have to go take a selfie and write a paragraph about their experience. And the kind of reckoning that they have with this experience of like being in a store where there's stuff, and sometimes they just buy it to have it. And they go, oh my God, I can buy t-shirts at this store or bumper stickers, right? And I've noticed over the past few years that this record store that I like to go to, I mean, it's huge. It's called Forever Young Records. It's about 15 minutes from my house. And it's gotten busier. So, and they're opening more record stores, and there's this feeling that people want things and they want to give gifts, so they can go and they can buy these vinyl records, and the record companies are making special stamped, like colored vinyl for different things, so you can get like the pink Taylor Swift copy of whatever the album that she just came out was, right? So it becomes ever more specific to a particular physical good that people can then say maybe they never listened to it, maybe they just like hang it on their wall, but it's this thing that they then feel. I don't know.
Missing like the material culture, the material aspects of music consumption, right? I think there's kind of a revival here in Brazil too, but not enough to compete with the streaming platforms. Absolutely not. That's my take on that. In Brazil, of course. Then Mari has a question. Mariana has a question. It's in Portuguese, but I'll try to translate it now. David, do you see relations between the unending consumption and what has been called the economy of attention, or attention economy, to comprehend to understand the logic of platformization? Or what connections do you think are more fruitful?
Yeah, I think the two are tightly tied. I think the discussion I made about Lil Nas X is really kind of important to this. I'll share this today. I just started writing about something because I saw it. This is an alternative. So I read Rolling Stone. I don't. The issue is in the other room, but I read Rolling Stone, and they're having what they call the creators issue, and Meta, Facebook's new parent company, right? So Facebook did all these ads for it. So this was the alternative cover that was stuck on to the front. Sometimes they stick on alternative covers, and it's just an advertisement cover. And it's this woman, Bella Porch. And Bella Porch, I'd never heard of her. Maybe somebody out there has. She's the third biggest person on TikTok. And so I think as I started doing this, so I'm working on this new book, Digital Feudalism, and it has a chapter on it about creators. So the fact that like this blew my mind that Rolling Stone has this issue, cover issue on the creators issue. Excuse me. Well, I start looking into Bella Porch, and Bella Porch, she's not very big on the Facebook platform. She's got, I think, 14 million followers on Instagram, which is pretty big, but it's not like she is on TikTok. She's number 3 on TikTok. But she used that position on the attention economy to Warner Records signed her, and she's released 2 singles. And those 2 singles, one of them became platinum certified. So she took her influencer attention economy and turned that into music. But again, music is just part of the element there, right? And one of the things that I argue about these kind of celebrities is they don't really matter much. So it doesn't matter whether she has kind of sustaining popularity as a musician, as a singer. That's irrelevant. It's all about her being an influencer. And Warner knows that they can sell music by her, whether it's good or not, or whether she ever produces more than 2 songs. She probably recouped enough. She made enough money to pay for the contract off of that one hit. So, they can move on or not. They can try to push her further, or they can say, all right, we're moving on to the next person because, her views, her followers are going down and somebody else is bigger.
I get, yeah. Oh my God. Okay, there's another question. So let's move on to the other one, to another question. Eveline Araújo, what do you think of the very slow process of streaming accessibility, audio description, and sign language in movie streaming? Thank you, Eveline. And what about the migration of events with film festivals to streaming? What are the consequences of these factors?
Can you go back? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
audio accessibility. All right, sorry. So a couple things. I think as audio accessibility, I mean, this isn't a great area of expertise of mine. But one thing that I find very fascinating is on Netflix, the way in the past year, their 3 top shows have been international, have been global. And so those 3 top shows are, I just lost the name of it, about playing children's game in Korea. Why can't I think?
Oh, I watched that. It was terrible. Oh my gosh, I forgot the name too. It's like the, oh my gosh, I saw that. It's so violent. I'm gonna Google it.
Okay. So that was the number 1 show. You have a French show by the name of Lupin, which is a great show. And then finally, the third one is Money Heist, which is a Spanish show. So these are the 3 top shows. Beatriz, did you find the name? I can't think of it.
It's round 6, right? You're talking about?
It's not round. That must be the Squid Game. There we go.
Okay.
Thank
I was
you.
thinking about something else.
Yes, Squid Game. I don't know why I couldn't. I love that show. That show is phenomenal. And so is Lupin. Money Heist. My wife got tired of watching it. And all 3 of these shows are critiques of capital, right? So one thing that I think is fascinating, and I don't know if this kind of gets to the audio accessibility question, but they're doing a phenomenal job of putting the subtitles on these shows as they're released, so that they can kind of go internationally. So I don't know if that answers the audio accessibility question. But as far as the elimination of what's called windowing here in the United States, that time period between launch and or theater launch and access on streaming platforms, basically during COVID, they got rid of it here, so that as soon as a film came out, you could find it online. I'm subscribed to Disney Plus here in the United States, and they kept putting out those films. I'd rarely subscribe because they were $20 to do it, whereas usually a rental in the US is like $4 to $5 if you want to rent. So $20 is a lot, for being able to get access first. I can wait 2 months and watch it for free on Disney, or for $5 on Amazon Prime. So it's an interesting phenomenon. It's beginning to go back out. Marvel just released yesterday Doctor Strange in theaters only. So unless you want to pirate it and watch it immediately online, you got to go to the theater. And I don't know about in Brazil, but the COVID numbers are going back up here again. So I don't know how many people are like, oh, I'm really dying to go see Doctor Strange live, but there is a lot of that kind of blurring, and especially with the more art house films, you see a lot more people willing to release them online quicker at a loss. So there is that phenomenon going on.
Thank you, David. I saw somebody posting that in Brazil, Squid Game is called Round 6, so they changed the names. I don't know for what reason, but anyway, that's great.
What I figured was going on there.
Yeah. Then we have Maíra Bianchini. Question for it's in Portuguese, so I'll try to translate the same way I did with the other one. Question for David: what repercussions do you think the unending consumption may have for investments of the platforms in original content, especially talking about TV series? So what repercussions does the unending consumption have for investments in platforms for original content, especially focusing on TV series? Obrigada, Maíra. Thank you, Maíra.
I think that's a great question. One of the things that I see happening, so all the platforms are focusing more and more on original content. Things like Disney Plus, these are huge. Amazon Prime, Amazon being the most valuable country, or not the most valuable, I call it the most valuable company in the world. Jeff Bezos is our kind of overlord. Makes it so they can keep producing things just to make sure that people keep subscribing, whether or not they make money or not. So I think that there is a lot more money going into original television shows on these platforms, but it's not as risky. So as I mentioned, right, they produce a few episodes. If it doesn't work out, they can just easily move on. They still have the episodes on there, just because they put the money into it and it doesn't hit. If they have one season of a show, that one season can always be available online, and that content is always there as something that subscribers can watch. So they can do that. My big concern is that the original content that keeps going on to more and more platforms. And I see this with like Apple Plus. I don't subscribe to Apple Plus. I refuse to subscribe to Apple Plus. But I recently was on a plane and I ended up watching their first hit show, which is called Ted Lasso. It came out. They had 2 episodes only available on the show. I was on a 2.5-hour flight. I was like, oh yeah, I can really watch a few of these. And then I can only watch 2 episodes. And then I'm left with, man, I kind of want to subscribe to Apple Plus at this point. But the question that I wonder, I think number one is I wish these platforms would quit doing that. But I think that we're always moving towards conglomeration. And how long is Apple Plus going to be around before they just start giving their content to the more kind of a la carte companies like Hulu, Netflix, and Amazon Prime? Because far more people subscribe to those platforms, and they have stuff that's not original. Whereas Apple Plus, you pretty much only get original content on there. They've made a play for things like Friends, but even Friends got taken away, I think, by HBO Max, right? So there's a lot of different movement going on, and they try to figure a way to get people to subscribe to their platform, a lot of times through original content, but I don't know how long this is going to last. I think that there's a streaming bubble.
That's a very interesting idea. I don't know. I would think it would be like the future of streaming would be exactly focusing on original content, but then maybe it's not what we're going to see, right? One thing that I was thinking about from the previous questions is also about comparing our media consumption now with streaming platforms with the past. Another difference is our data. So we as users, as consumers, we give these platforms a lot of information on what we like and what we don't like. And then it's completely different from before. Before we did have, of course, the audience measures and surveys and etc., but it's completely different. So could you comment on this difference on our data being used to produce these original contents, or maybe not to do that, but to buy friends because they know it's going to sell? But for me, it's a huge difference between the way we consume media nowadays and before. So could you comment on this kind of a platformization of our own data, of our own selves, in a very radical way? Maybe not too radical.
I mean, one of the benefits is if they know, it used to be so driven by demographic groups, and it was general demographic groups. They couldn't precisely hit things in the broadcast era because they wanted to focus on where they would get the bang for the bucks in the kind of audience commodity, right? So here in the United States, you probably have the fewest viewers, but the most expensive advertising for something like golf, right? You turn on a golf show, a golf match, and Rolex watches are for sale, Audi cars, Porsches, right? The really high-end stuff is for sale during golf shows, right? So this is like classic audience commodity things. But now, the second I search for something, I just finished teaching, and I was sitting here thinking, man, I'd really like to play a video game. And I'd been doing some research and reading a book, and I got thinking about the old video game Civilizations, which I loved to play when I was a kid. I had never played it again. So I went and I searched for it. I purchased Nintendo Switch version. I'd always play it on my computer. And then lo and behold, I start getting in my Twitter feed, because I'm logged into Twitter while I'm doing everything, Switch advertisements, which I'd never seen a Switch advertisement before. I don't know that they knew that I had a Switch because I'd never really searched for it. My wife buys me video games for holidays and my birthday. And so lo and behold, here are my Switch advertisements coming up. And they know what precisely someone like me might want to play. They know what kind of television shows I might want to watch because I'm logged into everything at the same time. So they do get that hyper specific demographic information. And they know not only, do I like watching Squid Game, but because Squid Game demographics look like this, Twitter demographics look like this, and they can kind of triangulate all this stuff, and they can start pushing other products like sodas or beer, or I'm thinking a lot about liquids, I guess. But they can say, here, buy this house good as well, because we know you want it. And so they can also create shows targeted to those specific demographics as well. So it kind of goes both ways. And within unending consumption, this increases the consumption, because if they know in Squid Game they can do a particular type of product placement, although I don't think they do product place. I can't think of a product placement in that television show, except they are out of the world some in the beginning, out of the Squid Game world. So that they can begin to think like, what kind of product placement can I do for this particular demographic that's consuming us?
That's a very good point. I would have I think people would have more questions than I would. So I would too myself, but I think we have to end soon. Just if you want to comment, you talked in your presentation about digital feudalism. That's something new that you're working on. If you want to finish with that, maybe we can just to have something for the next chapter, for the next conversation in the future, maybe.
Great, yeah. So digital feudalism, as I worked and I was calling this moment of capitalism unending consumption, I didn't think it fully works. And actually, this is what's so frustrating of why I couldn't think of Squid Game. I kind of wrote the book around Squid Game, and I almost used the term Squid Game capitalism instead of digital feudalism, but I didn't know whether that name will go as far. But so what I see in the current moment are three features. You have unending consumption, precarious labor, and finally debt peonage. So we have these three things that are going on as kind of the most important characteristics of capitalism right now. So it's like subscriptions, people no longer are working jobs where they know that their job's going to actually pay them for the work that they do. People are driving Uber or doing delivery services, or there was a thing popular in major cities in the United States for a while called Task Rabbits, where you would pay people to say, put together some IKEA furniture for you. They'd come to your house and they'd do it. So all these kind of precarious forms of labor that I see as emerging out of the music industry first, because that's exactly the kind of labor that musicians are. And then as far as the debt peonage, increasingly because wages aren't going up, and now they are going up in the United States, but it's not keeping up with the rate of inflation. So people have to do these precarious jobs more and more. They have to run up credit card bills to keep up with the very social needs that Karl Marx talks about that are put upon us. So if you need internet access, if you need a smartphone, these are all new needs in society that we didn't used to have. So they're new stuff that we have to pay for. So I think that kind of encapsulates this moment. So I'm doing that, and then I'm looking at different just like with the streaming culture book, I'm hoping to do the same publisher, same kind of style. The proposal's out now, introduction's done. But I'm hoping that what I'll do is look at things like Amazon creators. So that's why this chapter is going to be important to it. And it'll look at the quote unquote metaverse and what that means for this kind of world that we're in. So that's a kind of preview.
Nice. Thank you for sharing with us. I really do believe now we have to end our conversation for today, but I really want to thank David for this wonderful conversation that we had. It was a pleasure hearing to your talk, to all the contributions that you have made. And I want to thank the audience for being with us and for all the great questions. I'm sorry if I believe we covered all the questions, but in case we didn't do that, you can approach David. Please come to Brazil.
Well, if there's ever an opportunity to bring me down there, I'd love to come to Brazil.
Let's hope the pandemics will not affect those plans in the future. But thank you once again, everybody. Thank you, Rafael, also for this invitation. And I don't know if you want to say some last words, Rafael. I may close the event, or you want to say something just to... Okay, he said I can do it myself. So I'll do it in English and then in Portuguese. Thank you so much once again, David and everybody. Muito obrigada a todas e todos e todas que estiveram conosco aqui nessa tarde. A gravação desse evento vai ficar lá no canal da Compós. Então, depois vocês podem assistir, quem não pôde estar conosco aqui hoje. E muito obrigada pelas perguntas, foram ótimas. Espero que a gente continue esse debate no futuro. Bye. Yeah, see you soon. Bye, bye. Sextou. É isso aí, galera. Sextou.